In 1821, the Greeks successfully blocked the Turkish army's progress down the eastern route to the Peloponnese by a victory at Vasilika near Thermopylae. By 1822, the Turks were preparing for another attempt, and their position was better due to the release of Ali Pasha's death and the assembly of a massive force at Larissa. Mahmud, the leading commander, was appointed by the Sultan to lead this massive force into the Peloponnese. However, the Greeks' defenses were weaker due to violent dissension among their leaders, particularly in East Rumeli. The first 6 months of 1822 were spent on murderous internal disputes, while the Greeks captured the Acropolis of Athens, an impoverished community of around 10,000 inhabitants. Most Greeks fled for safety to the island of Salamis, where they began a blockade of the Turks in the Acropolis. The arrival of Omer Vrionis in July 1821 interrupted the siege, and the Greek blockade resumed. The Greeks attempted to attack the west end of the Acropolis but failed, seizing the well outside the walls on the southern slope, which was the source of healing waters for the ancient worship of the god Asclepios, and the only supply of drinking water for the Turks in the garrison. In April, a mine collapsed and a party of Greeks and Philhellenes rushed the breach. By early summer, the Turks could no longer last out and capitulated on favorable terms on 22 June. The people of Athens were in a post-liberation bloodlust, and the fall of the Acropolis exacerbated Greek discord. Dramali's army, assembled at Lamia, crossed the Spercheios River to cross the Peloponnese, recapture the citadel of Corinth, relieve the Turks, and recapture Tripolis. Dramali's goal was to occupy Argos and relieve the Turks besieged in Navplion. By June 1822, the Turks' provisions were exhausted and a capitulation agreement was signed. The national government sent clerks to inventory the property to be surrendered, and individual Greeks made bargains with the Turks. The Turks found they could buy provisions from the Greeks and were anxious to spin out negotiations until Dramali's arrival. Peloponnesian bands fled to nearby Argos where terror and confusion reigned. The Greeks countered Dramali's lightning incursion by burning crops, occupying the citadel of Argos, and appointing Kolokotronis as commander of the forces resisting him. At a council of war, Yusuf Pasha and Ali of Argos proposed splitting the army into 3 sections, one to press towards Tripolis, a second to occupy the region around Palavrida, and a third to move to Patras. However, Dramali was overruled by Dramali, who was determined to lead the entire army to Tripolis. Kolokotronis aimed to counter the Turks' strength by assembling his forces and assembling a band of 2,000 men. He blocked the way to Tripolis, forcing Dramali to lead his army back to Corinth. The Greeks seized an enormous amount of the Turkish army's valuables and baggage, losing around 2,000 dead in the actions on the 6th and 8th of August. The depleted army of Dramali settled in Corinth for the winter, but the aftermath brought further setbacks for the Turks. In 1822, the Greeks achieved success in the Peloponnese but faced failures elsewhere. They defeated Pita and Kara Ali's flagship but captured Athens and Navplion. Kolokotronis won a victory at Dervenakia. The provisional Greek government was established at Epidavros, but local elections were not completed in time, and the Second National Assembly was not ready until early April 1823. The assembly had conflicting objectives, with politicians wanting to control the military and politicians simply providing supplies. Petrobi Mavromichalis of the Mani was elected president, while Mavrokordatos became president of the committee overseeing the revision of the Epidavros constitution. The assembly passed 2 contentious resolutions, dividing insurgent Greece into 60 districts, and selling off the national property, the Ethnika Ktimata. The Senate elected holders to new offices, with Ioannis Orlandos as the Senate's president. In July 1822, a dispute arose between the government, opponents, and the Senate and the executive. Orlandos resigned as Senate president, and Anagnostis Delianis was appointed to succeed him. Mavrokordatos was elected as president, but he resigned due to dissension with the Kolokotronis Delianis faction and the executive's view of Mavrokordatos as an attempt to poach one of its key officers. In 1823, a Turkish fleet and land forces were prepared under Kapitan Pasha Khosref. but a combined Greek squadron led by Miaoulis of Hydra captured a 28-gun corvette and 4 brigs. The Turkish fleet suffered a loss in December, and the Suliot bands failed to hold up Mustafa's army in Mount Kaliakuta. The combined Greek force moved towards Mesolongi, capturing the islet of Anatolico. The Turkish armies withdrew after 6 weeks of siege. The Greeks were divided between those supporting the executive and those supporting the Senate, leading to antipathy between regions and shifting allegiances. Kolokotronis, a member of the executive, joined the Senate under threats, but resigned due to his weak military leadership. The Senate dismissed the finance minister and one of the executive's members, leading to a quorum being reduced to 2. In December 1823, the Senate appointed Kolettis as president, and by 1824, Greece had 2 governments, one at Kranidi and the other at Tripolis. Both bodies claimed legality and tried to outmaneuver each other. Byron, a poet and philanderer, had a pleasant memory of Greece after his travels in 1809 to 1810 with John Cam Hobhouse. He was impressed by the ancient monuments of Athens and had a high opinion of the Suliots, who had rescued and entertained him after a shipwreck near Parga. From 1810 to 1816, Byron experienced a rise and fall in his fame and wealth due to the publication of his verse, as well as scandalous affairs, dissipation, and debt. Byron met Teresa Guiccioli, who was 19 and married to Count Alessandro Guiccioli. Their marriage ended when Byron returned to find them quasi in the fact. Byron joined the Carbonari, an Italian organization working for independence from Austrian domination. In 1822, Byron's 5-year-old daughter, Allegra, died in Ravenna, and Shelley was drowned in the Gulf of Genoa. During the winter of 1822 to 1823, Byron became increasingly restless in Genoa, unsure of his future plans. He was attracted to the idea of a simple but useful life in newly liberated South America and Greece. He received news that he had been elected a member of the London Greek Committee, but no specific instructions were given. In July 1823, Byron prepared for his departure from Genoa with the Hercules, a 120-ton ship. The voyage began inauspiciously, but they reached Livorno, where they took on board James Hamilton Brown, who recommended Byron head for Kefalonia, governed by Colonel Charles James Napier as resident. Byron was willing to support the defense of Mesolongi by Suliot Marcos Botsaris, who was facing the Turks at Karpenisi. On December 12, 1823, Colonel Leicester Stanhope, representative of the London Greek Committee, arrived in Mesolongi with orders to work alongside Byron for the liberation of Greece. Byron decided to embark for Mesolongi, where he would be better placed to oversee the distribution of an English loan channeled through the Ionian Islands and have easier access to his funds through his Ionian bankers. The Greek government in 1822 was struggling financially and had 3 possible sources of income: plunder, taxes and duties, and contributions from abroad. However, the government needed hundreds of thousands of pounds sterling to finance its war-torn country. To raise this amount, the government attempted to borrow £200,000 equivalent from abroad, but had no success. Andreas Loriotis, the government's agent, was introduced to the London Greek Committee, which was formed by prominent London Philhellenes. The committee's first act was to report on Greece's state and persuade the Greek government to send official agents who could contract a loan on its behalf. They set sail for Greece, where they met with Byron in Genoa, who sealed their fate and rearranged the prospects for Greece. London was the best place to raise a loan of the size the Greeks needed, as Britain's early lead in the Industrial Revolution generated more capital than domestic agriculture and industry could absorb. London had developed a group of active traders to promote such outlets, and loans to foreign governments, such as newly independent South America, were particularly attractive due to the reduced interest rate on British government bonds and the new syndicate system. Blaquier, the main author of Puffs for the Greeks, published two books in 1824 and 1825, which provided an extended false prospectus about Greece's physical strength and potential for repayment. Philip Green, writing from Zakynthos, believed that there was not the slightest probability of repayment of interest or capital. If the London Greek Committee and its financier friends had listened to Green, there would have been no Greek loan. In 1824, two Greek deputies, Andreas Loriotis and Ioannis Orlandos, arrived in London to contract a loan for Greece. Orlandos, a reassurance for investors, was linked to the family of Georgios Kondouriotis, the president of the executive. The deputies signed a loan agreement with the issuing house of Loughman, O'Brien, Ellis and Company. The loan stock was put on sale to the public. The Greek bonds had a nominal value of £800,000, but the stock was offered at a 59% discount, resulting in a subscription amount of only £472,000. Interest was at 5% on the nominal value, equivalent to over 8.5% on the actual investment. The issuers retained 2 years' interest and a further 1% as a contribution to a sinking fund for the eventual repayment of the loan. The loan appeared to have everything in its favor for London investors, with generous interest, capital gain, and guaranteeing the total resources of the Greek state. The loan to Greece was initially successful but soon fell due to a lack of news from Greece and the death of Byron. The loan agreement required payments in 6 installments, which caused investors to cut losses and sell off their partly paid stock. To support the price, Bowring and his associates sold their stock to Greek deputies, but faced personal crises. Disputes over the loan money's application further soured relations between the loan's promoters and Greek deputies. The first nominees were Byron and Stanhope, but Greek deputies complained that this purely British arrangement damaged Greece's interest. They proposed a third commissioner, Lazaros Koundouriotis, but objections were raised. Bentham proposed an intricate solution, which involved an additional Greek commissioner, an anti-government party, and a Greek commissioner. Byron's death and the revocation of Byron to England further complicated matters. The first £40,000 of the loan was deposited with Samuel Barf, Byron's banker, and the second installment arrived in the Little Sally. The Ionian government issued a proclamation forbidding deposits and imposed heavy penalties on those involved. Barf defied the government, declaring that the money was intended for the Greeks, but the loan money arrived in Navplion during a lull in civil strife that tore Greece apart during 1824. In 1824, Greece had two governments, the new executive led by Georgios Koundouriotis, and senators based in Kranidi, and the old executive dominated by Kolokotronis. The conflict between the two sides was a civil war, with the Senate having the constitutional right to appoint the executive members. There were two civil wars between the government and rebels, with the first originating from Panos Kolokotronis's attack on senators in Argos in December 1823, and ending with his surrender of Navplion to the government in June 1824. The government initially secured easier objectives such as entering Argos and moving on Tripolis, while the rebels eventually reached an agreement. The government eventually held off the rebel offensive and agreed to order the surrender of Navplion on two conditions: formally handing over the town to Londos and Zaimis, his fellow Peloponnesians, and giving 25,000 piastres to Panos Kolokotronis to cover the back pay of his Navplion troops. The Senate was more conciliatory and endorsed the agreement to bring the fighting to an end. The First Civil War saw the government losing support from Peloponnesian captains, particularly Andreas Londos and Zaimis. The Second Civil War was ignited by a call for resistance from the people of Arcadia against government levies on their produce. The rebels were defeated in the villages and mountains of the northeast Peloponnese, and retribution spread even to those who had played no active part in the rebellion. In 1824, the Turks faced challenges in land warfare, losing fortresses and facing threats from Mesolongi. To counter this, the Sultan devised a new strategy involving Mehmed Ali, Pasha of Egypt, and his son Ibrahim Pasha. The plan involved bringing a large Egyptian force into the Peloponnese by sea, with the promise of the Pashalik of the Morea. The goal was to destroy Khasos and eliminate Greek naval forces. The Greek fleet, led by Ibrahim Pasha, successfully blocked the Turkish fleet's objectives, and the Turkish Kapitan Pasha withdrew to Bodrum. The naval campaign of 1824 was considered the most glorious for Hellenic arms, but it was not a total success. In February 1825, Ibrahim Pasha fell in with Captain Drouot, who advised him to concentrate on pouring troops into one of the 3 Peloponnesian fortresses in Turkish hands. The Peloponnesian War began with Greek President Koundouris taking command of troops sent to the Navarino area. Ibrahim, a Greek commander, aimed to possess the Bay of Navarino and dislodge the Greeks from Sphacteria and the bay's 2 fortresses. Ibrahim's first objective was to eliminate the Greek land forces, which had come south to oppose him. He attacked with half that number but was supported by 400 cavalry, killing over 500 Greeks and taking many prisoners. Ibrahim's next objective was the island of Sphacteria, held by 800 Greeks and defended by 8 Greek fighting ships. The Egyptian fleet bombarded the Greek defenders, capturing Sphacteria within an hour. After capturing Sphacteria, Ibrahim's troops bombarded Old Navarino, leading to the Greek defenders losing their water and bread supply. The Greeks' last outpost was New Navarino, which was in poor shape and had a garrison of 1,500 men. Europeans played a significant role in the fighting around Navarino, with Colonel Sev accepting Ibrahim's offer of service and changing his name to Osman Bey. The Greek government intervened, amnestying all who had fought against it in the civil wars. Captain Rowan Hamilton, an Irishman in command of the British frigate Cambrian, advised the Greek government to fight on and consider foreign assistance during the Greek War. In September 1825, a Greek delegation presented an act of submission to British Foreign Secretary Canning, which stated that the Greek nation placed its liberty, independence, and political existence under the absolute protection of Great Britain. This diplomatic initiative was rejected as inconsistent with Britain's neutrality, but Canning offered to promote any compromise between Greece and Turkey. The Greeks had hoped for aid from abroad in their fight for independence but feared that intervention by a foreign power might lead to a new form of dependence. Russia, particularly Russia, dominated the changes of attitude of other powers to the Greek question. Alexander resolved not to be drawn into war with Turkey solely to support the Greeks, but to apply pressure on Turkey, stopping short of war unless supported by other European powers. Russia's main instrument for bringing pressure on Turkey was the Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca, signed in 1774. This treaty ended the war between Turkey and Catherine the Great's Russia. The points of difference between Russia and Turkey were slowly resolved. Alexander's next Greek initiative came in January 1824, when he invited other Quintuple Alliance powers to a conference to jointly force the Turks to accept a settlement of the Greek question. In September 1825, Canning rejected the Greek Act of Submission to Britain, as acceptance would have made future cooperation with Russia impossible. A rapprochement between Britain and Russia was arranged in an unconventional manner, with Princess de Lieven visiting St. Petersburg and revealing Ibrahim Pasha's barbarization project. In 1825, the Greek-Turkish War split into 3 separate wars, with Ibrahim being the most victorious in the Peloponnese. Odysseus Anthroutsos, a successful leader of Greek irregulars, was made commander of the East Rumeli region and defeated the Turks at Gravia. However, little military success followed, and his relations with the government worsened. In June 1822, 2 emissaries were killed by the newly formed national government, leading Odysseus to believe they had orders to kill him. Later that year, he became commander of the garrison of the Athens Acropolis, but he was replaced by his lieutenant Gouras. In 1824, Gouras was called into the Peloponnese to help it win the Second Civil War, and Gouras was rewarded with the overall command of East Rumeli. By early 1825, Odysseus was receiving no support, supplies or pay from the government, and was losing men to captains who could get their hands on some of the English loan. In 1823, Odysseus took over and fortified a cave high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. In May 1824, Odysseus's lieutenant Trelawney arrived, bringing 4 light cannon from Mesolongi for the town's defense. The new occupants began work to make the cave impregnable, and William Humphreys visited the cave in autumn 1824, finding improvements in progress or finished. In April 1825, Odysseus gave himself up to Gurus, who tried to get possession of the cave, believed to contain a hoard of treasure. Whitcomb joined forces with other young English Philhellenes and went to the main Greek camp at the monastery of Osios Lucas. Fenton and George Jarvis promoted a plot against Odysseus, aiming to kill him and possibly Trelawney. Odysseus made his accommodation with the Turks in early 1825, making the justification for a plot against him invalid. Mesolongi, a Greek town, played a significant role in Greek history during the Ottoman Empire's final siege. Built on a lagoon, the town was strategically located to attack Greek forces. The town's walls, about a third of its perimeter, were raised, broadened, and fortified under the direction of engineer Michael Kokonis. In 1825, Rashid led his army south from Arta, crossing the Makronoros River without any resistance. His forces reached the plain of Mesolongi at the end of April, with around 20,000 fighting men. Rashid's army arrived in Mesolongi during the summer, and his laborers were tasked with digging trenches and mounds under the garrison's fire to bring his troops closer. 3 ways to attack Mesolongi's landward defensive walls were employed: battering through them, undermining them from below, or positioning his troops to attack them from above. The Greeks drove the Turks back from the remains of the original mound and destroyed it with a mine. Rashid would have been saved a great deal of trouble if he had managed to negotiate a surrender of Mesolongi. Mesolongi's supply line through the lagoon was open, allowing it to hold out under these conditions. Greek fleets under Miaoulis and Turkish fleets under the Kapitan Pasha were intermittently active off Mesolongi, bringing in supplies from Zakynthos and Creoneri. In 1825, Mesolongi experienced a triumphant year, but the Greeks believed they had won at Mesolongi. However, relations between Ibrahim Pasha and Rashid were strained, and the Greek garrison rejected 2 more offers of negotiation. On the 24th of February, a bombardment began in Mesolongi, Greece, with Turkish cannon and mortars pouring 8,000 projectiles into the town. The Greeks drove off 3 enemy assaults in hand-to-hand fighting, but the Arab troops failed to live up to their reputation. Ibrahim realized that Mesolongi could only be reduced by starvation and sought control of Mesolongi's lagoon, which was the garrison's source of fish and supply route. Ibrahim took over and sent 3,000 Arabs under Hussein Bey, who were shot down in numbers. The last major supply drop occurred at the end of January, leaving the Greeks with nothing but clothes and braces. Mesolongi's last significant service was carrying a commission of 6 leaders to Navplion to get help from the national government. The Greek government struggled to support the defenders of Mesolongi due to a lack of money. Loans from abroad were the only lifeline, with the first loan being floated in February 1824 with the backing of the London Greek Committee. The proceeds were passed directly to the Greek government, but the original commissioners never took up their task, leading to unsupervised and corrupt spending. The second loan was floated a year later but was oversubscribed 4.5 times by enthusiastic buyers. The money was raised almost exclusively on buying ships and providing war supplies, which would then be passed to Greece. Management of the expenditure was formally the responsibility of a 4-man board of control in London. The second loan enabled the Greek government to secure the services of Lord Cochrane as commander of the Greek naval forces. Cochrane had an extraordinary career, combining dash and pugnacity with meticulous preparation and extreme care for his crew. However, his career was dogged by conflict with authority, with him being court-martialed for insubordination, quarreling with the First Lord of the Admiralty, and being found guilty for stock exchange fraud. In 1825, with Brazil's independence virtually won, Cochrane resigned as the naval savior to the Greeks. In November 1825, Cochrane requested a second loan of £37,000 for serving in Greece, which included a fleet of 6 steamships and a fleet of paddle-wheeled steamships. The remaining 3 steamships were never completed and left to rot in the Thames. Recriminations about the handling of both loans were fueled by press campaigns in the Times and William Cobbett's Weekly Register. The Greek government, led by Koundouriotis and Mavrokordatos, was split by factions and had no money to prosecute the war or relieve the country's state. The sharing of authority between the executive and the Senate was seen as a mistake, slackening the executive's power during war. The first priority was to reform the government structure, which was replaced by a new National Assembly in April 1826. The Assembly decided on emergency measures to change the system of government, replacing the Senate and Executive with 2 new bodies, a government commission to conduct the war and run the country, and an Assembly commission to negotiate with foreign powers and reconvene the Assembly. The interim government by 2 commissions did little positive, with the councils being too numerous and motley to be efficient, and the government being paralyzed by poverty, leading to disrepute. In April 1826, the commissions took office and were expected to last only a few months until the Assembly reconvened. However, disagreement over where the Assembly should meet led to delays and the interim government moving to the island of Aina instead. In March 1827, the Trezena Assembly began its sessions, producing a new constitution and offering the presidency of Greece to Kapodistrias. The Constitution of Trezena was a balancing act, aiming to balance power between Britain and Russia. However, this arrangement was never tested, and the country was in a terrible state with an ineffective vice presidential commission and widespread disorder. In the summer of 1827, 7 distinct civil conflicts occurred, superseding the misery caused by Ibrahim's invasion. The Trezena Assembly's Bill of Rights has survived as the strongest weapon of liberty against autocracy. In February 1826, Austria's consul met Ibrahim at Messalongi and reported on Ibrahim's plans for the future. Ibrahim planned to attack Hydra and Nauplia by land and sea to seize the last Greek strongholds in the Peloponnese. However, he was weaker on land due to the loss of Egyptian ships and the growing threat from Russia. Mehmed Ali saw the addition of the Peloponnese as strengthening his position within the Ottoman Empire. In 1832, Ibrahim seized the Ottoman province of Syria for Egypt, but Mehmed Ali refused to keep his fleet in Greek waters, or commit a single extra soldier from Egypt to secure the rapidly tarnishing prize of the Peloponnese. The problems that weakened the Ottoman Empire by 1826 were both external and internal. Russia threatened war, and Turkey reluctantly accepted an ultimatum from Tsar Nicholas I in February 1826. The threat of a Russian war receded, but Russia declared war as a result. Mahmud gradually increased the privileges of the religious establishment, drew clerics away from their traditional support of the Janissaries as the one truly Islamic force, and built support within the Janissaries by ousting senior officers and replacing them with younger men who supported reform. In May 1826, the Sultan announced reforms aimed at creating a new force of Janissary regiments, uniformed, armed, and trained on Egyptian lines. The first parade of these troops was held in At Maidani, near the Blue Mosque, and the revolt was quickly crushed. However, the Sultan's reforms came too late to shift the balance in his favor in the conflict with the Greeks. The Greeks had 2 main options for their strategy for Athens: attacking Rashid's supplies by attacking the chain of posts or directly attacking Rashid's forces from the coast at Piraeus. The Greek army for the attack on Athens had been considerably strengthened, with Karaiskakis joining it with 3,000 men. In April 1826, Britain and Russia signed the Protocol of St. Petersburg, aiming to offer mediation to the Turks and Greeks, intervene if mediation failed, and invite Austria, France and Prussia to join them. Austria opposed this proposal, while Prussia followed Austria's lead. France was intent on extending its influence in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt, to match Britain's position in India and balance any Russian expansion. In April 1825, the French government agreed to build 2 frigates and a brig of war at Marseille for Egypt and proposed placing a French king on the throne of an independent Greece. However, Roche's mission was effectively ended by the Greek Act of Submission to England in the summer of 1825. By the beginning of 1826, France's efforts to extend her influence by acting independently and largely clandestinely had come to nothing. The Treaty of London, signed by Britain, Russia, and France on the 6th of July, 1827, contained 7 open articles and 3 secret articles. The open articles proposed limited autonomy for Greece as a tribute-paying dependency of Turkey. Meanwhile, the secret articles set out what the 3 signatory powers would do, establishing commercial relations with Greece and imposing an armistice if Turkey, Greece, or both did not accept an armistice within a month. The Treaty of London set the Allied and Ottoman naval forces on a potential collision course, with Mehmed Ali's modern-style fleet carrying 3,500 guns and over 30,000 sailors. The 3 Allied admirals were Sir Edward Codrington for Britain, Count de Rigny for France, and Count Haydn for Russia. The Battle of Navarino was a pivotal naval engagement during the Greek War of Independence. It took place on October 20, 1827, and saw the combined fleets of Britain, France, and Russia clashing with the Ottoman and Egyptian armada. This battle was a decisive moment that helped shape the future of Greece. On the 7th of September, 1827, the Turkish and Egyptian fleet anchored in the Bay of Navarino, where Ibrahim was based. Admiral Codrington intercepted every supply sent against Greece, warning Ibrahim that if he resisted, his fleet would be destroyed. Ibrahim agreed to remain at Navarino and suspend operations until he received answers from Constantinople and Alexandria. However, Ibrahim and his colleagues had different understandings of the agreement, leading to Ibrahim bringing 48 of his ships out of Navarino to head for Patras. The Greek naval commander, Ibrahim, continued his campaign of devastation in the Peloponnese after the failure of his Patras expedition. The 3 admirals, united by the arrival of Haydn and his Russian fleet, sent a joint letter to Ibrahim ordering him to desist, but were told that nobody knew Ibrahim's location. The Greeks were determined to drive Ibrahim's fleet out of the Peloponnese, and Codrington and de Rigny agreed to force Ibrahim's return to Egypt. Letellier arranged the disposition of the Turco-Egyptian fleet, positioning Turkish and Egyptian ships at anchor in a triple line of horseshoe formation. On the 20th of October, the Allied fleet began moving through the Bay of Navarino with the English squadron, French and Russian ships. The Battle of Navarino was a significant naval battle in the 18th century, involving the Ottoman fleet and the Allied fleet. The Ottoman fleet was virtually without command, with Tahir's ship sunk and Muharrem Bey leaving. The battle was triggered by unplanned shots from the Ottoman commanders, who had never trusted each other and had formed no joint plan. The 3 English line-of-battle ships fired over 120 tons of shot, requiring a lot of powder. The Turkish fire ships also threatened the Allied fleet, with the Dartmouth escaping and another nearly destroying the French ship Scipion. The battle ended with 174 killed and 475 wounded, and the Ottoman fleet lost 60 of its fighting ships. The battle confirmed the ultimate independence of Greece, which had seemed almost lost when Athens surrendered to the Turks. In 1827, Kapodistrias was offered the post of President of Greece by Navarino. He arrived in Navplion in January 1828 and was welcomed by all classes. However, he soon began to exert his power, suspending the constitution established by the Trezena National Assembly. Trikoupis accepted the position of Secretary of State but had doubts about Kapodistrias's early move. Kapodistrias struggled to establish the foundations of civil society in Greece, focusing on creating a currency, taxation method, legal framework, courts of justice, postal system, and schools. He was supported by leaders like Trikoupis, Makrianis, and Kolokotronis. After Ibrahim's forces left the Peloponnese, he faced difficulties in supplying troops and assembling a French force under General Maison. French consul Drovetti proposed an intricate proposal to Mehmed Ali, which was ratified by the Convention of Alexandria. However, French forces arrived, and the fortress garrisons surrendered after mock attacks. In 1828, Greek naval commander Cochrane left Greece to find crews and raise money for an independent Greek state. Hastings took over the main naval effort, and Anatolico and Messolongi fell to the Greeks in 1829. Capodistrias appointed Agostino as lieutenant plenipotentiary of Rumeli, but Church was incensed and asked for a change in his authority. The London Conference, established by the Treaty of London, determined the extent of Greece's new country and its status. The ambassadors to Constantinople met on Poros in September 1828 to consider the boundary question. The Poros report was accepted by the three governments, but Turkey refused to come to the negotiating table. The Treaty of Adrianople of September 1829 included Turkish acceptance of Allied mediation and an armistice in Greece, as well as the broad outline of the status of Greece. Turkish resistance to an independent Greece was finally broken, and Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg emerged as the acceptable candidate for the Greek throne. During Capodistrias's presidency, Greece was waiting for a national assembly to approve or amend the provisional government he introduced. After repeated postponements, the new assembly met at Argos in July 1829, with 236 delegates, majority supporters of Capodistrias. In 1832, Greece experienced more confusion and conflict than any year since the war began, leading to widespread devastation and undoing much of Capodistrias's work of reconstruction. Events in Britain, including the election of Lord Grey, led to the restoration of the Arta Volos line and the acceptance of a larger Greece. The question of a king for Greece was also settled, with King Ludwig I of Bavaria promoting his 17-year-old son Otto. The Greek War of Independence, which lasted from 1821 to 1832, was a significant revolt by Greek revolutionaries against the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled Greece for centuries. The war resulted in Greece's independence in 1832 with the establishment of the modern Greek state. The war resulted in Greece's independence in 1832 with the establishment of the modern Greek state. The Greek revolutionaries received significant international support, particularly from Britain, France, and Russia. The Greek revolutionaries received significant international support, particularly from Britain, France, and Russia. European Philhellenism played a significant role in the Battle of Navarino in 1827, securing Greek independence. The conflict severely weakened the Ottoman Empire's control over its European territories, particularly in Greece, and exposed its vulnerability. The Treaty of London in 1832 led to the establishment of the Kingdom of Greece under King Otto of Bavaria, marking the official creation of the modern Greek state. The war caused significant loss of life and devastation, and it also highlighted the rise of nationalist movements across Europe.